Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host.
Her dad is Welsh, her mum is from PNG, but she was born in Australia,
Leanne Hughes.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you develop and deliver workshops that kill. This week's episode is a solo one, and it is the final part of my 3-part series for the 12 rules for facilitation. Back in episode 57, I shared the first 4 rules. In episode 59, I shared rules 5 through to 8, and today I share the last 9 to 12. I was inspired by Dr. Jordan Peterson's book, The 12 Rules for Life, and thought I could share my thoughts, some things and rules that have really helped me and guided my journey as a facilitator and hopefully can help you as a first-time facilitator. If you haven't listened to the other episodes, don't worry. Each of these episodes is a standalone one. But if you are catching up, here are the first 8 rules. And look, if you've heard this before, I wonder how many of these that you can remember. Okay, here we go. Rule number 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Rule number 2, iron your shirt the night before a workshop. Rule number 3, give yourself a fake deadline and convince yourself that it's real. Rule number 4, finish at 5 p.m. means we're out the door by 4:55 p.m. Rule number 5, it takes a lot of work to look natural. Rule number 6, establish a cool down routine. Rule number 7, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And rule number 8, define what it means to get into state. I've had a bit of feedback around these rules and everyone is loving rule number 7, start where you are, use what you have and do what you can. I think it's quite a reassuring rule to have. And look, as always, if you'd like to keep the conversation going when the episode is over, you can head on over to the free Facebook group called The Flip Chart, where we share facilitation stories, tips, tools, what you're up to, any advice that you need if you're running an upcoming workshop. And you can also sign up to the monthly newsletter called The Flip Chart. It'd be great to see you on the list there. Any links to resources mentioned in this episode will be on the show notes page at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 62. And if you'd like to see what I'm up to during the week, both personally and professionally, just hop on over to Instagram and follow me. I'm on there at Leanne Hughes. Okay, now onto the show. Rule number 9, never start a workshop with logistics. I've been doing a bit of lifting other people's content. So this rule's been lifted and slightly modified from The Art of Gathering, a book by Priya Parker. So Steph Clark is a previous guest on the podcast. Well, she's actually been on 2 episodes. And she gave me this book. It's been an incredible go-to guide for all things events, gatherings, workshops. It's actually quite brilliant. In the book, though, Priya's rule is never start a funeral with logistics. I wanted to read a couple of passages out of this book because it really struck me when I read it. So this is what she says. Before your event starts, it has begun. Your gathering begins at the moment your guest first learns of it. This may sound obvious, but it's not. In my experience, hosts often think of their event as beginning when you call a meeting to order or take your seats at the wedding. In each of these cases, your guests have been thinking about and preparing for and anticipating your gathering well in advance of that moment. They have been experiencing your gathering from what I call the moment of discovery. The window of time between the discovery and the formal beginning is an opportunity to prime your guests. And then she goes on to talk about the 90% rule. So what that is that 90% of what makes a gathering successful, in this case your workshop, is put in place beforehand. It's the pre-dialogue phase. She also talks about the scale of the ask and the scale of the preparation. So if you've got a bigger ask, for example, people are traveling in from long distances to attend your workshop, the more care, attention, and detail should be put into the pre-game phase. So I'll leave it at that, but I could easily continue and read the whole book as part of this stage. But this does link closely into rule number 5, which is it takes a lot of work to look natural. And on this podcast, I've interviewed a ton of facilitators who always advise, or seem to always advise, that preparation is key. And as facilitators, I think it's good to remind ourselves that our role doesn't simply just start at the beginning of the day. I've shared examples of times that I've done pre-work prior, but I'll reinvigorate them for this rule. So let's talk about the internal communication. So how are you, or how is your client pitching your upcoming workshop? Are they being given the information that they need to create this positive mindset, or is it an email with a couple of sentences saying, oh, you must come to training? So if you listen to my conversation with Jason Knight in the last episode, we explored a whole concept. We discussed, what if your workshop was like coming to a wedding? There's so much anticipation around a wedding. So how can you spin it so people are actually excited, interested, and curious in what they're about to learn and about to be exposed to? On the flip side, maybe you don't want everyone excited. Maybe you want them just to really plan. For example, you might be facilitating a strategic planning day. So a good tip for you as a facilitator is not to simply wait for that strategic planning day to start, but it may be wise to meet with your participants prior and find out what they want to do with their function, what a good meeting really looks like for them, what success looks like for them, what ideas they have, and try and get all this sort of pre-work out in the open and discussed before the day. So when you're all together, you can use that time really wisely. In a recent episode, we also spoke about the ragged start, and that was with Dr. Catherine Lloyd and Andrew Rickson. So I learned what that looks like at their story cookbook workshop in Brisbane. So when I walked in, the workshop was meant to start at 10. I got there at about 10 to 10. I walked in and they're like, oh, welcome. We don't really officially start till 10:30, but grab an activity. There's flip charts around the room. You can grab a pen, answer some questions on the flip chart, grab a tea and coffee, and meet the other participants. So the ragged start was great. You could just come in, pick up that flip chart marker, start writing, and just casually meeting people. It was really informal. And what I love about that is I know that sometimes with workshops, you have a hard start. So you're like, right, it must start at 9 a.m. And if a couple of people are late, you still start, but you got to catch those latecomers. You got to catch them up to the content, which can be frustrating. But if you have this ragged start, it doesn't really seem to be a problem because people are in the room, in that first half hour, ready to go when you do decide to start. So it's quite good. Rule number 10, assume your technology will always fail. It's not very positive, is it, Leanne? But on the flip chart recently, Uyan posted in the group a really funny meme, and the meme said, one does not simply whip up a PowerPoint. I thought it was quite funny because I think given all the cool apps, the design features, the technology, and of course PowerPoint that is available to us, it's just so easy to get excited and base your workshop design around the latest games and technology. And I know it's easy because I tend to do it a lot. Hey, I never said I had to obey every rule all of the time, but it just seems like it's always an impulse response for me. So I know when I think about if I put on my to-do list that I need to design an upcoming workshop, where I place myself is I need to do that behind a computer. And I don't know why I do that. I think it's because of all the time I've spent in corporate, where for some reason we associate being at the computer with doing the work. But what I've noticed now as a solopreneur, I want to disrupt that pattern, and I know that I can work and be more productive and I don't need to be in front of the computer, which is quite refreshing. So in episode 34 of the podcast, I interviewed Toon Verlinden, and he's a chemical engineer, and he shared the opinion too about what he notices when others have to prepare for workshops. He said that when most of us are asked to present, what we do as a default is we open PowerPoint, And PowerPoint tells us to add a title, so we add the title in, and then PowerPoint tells us to add bullet points, and so we do that as well. So this rule is really about how can you design your workshops without technology in mind at all. So it's about taking the time out first to develop a robust process to ensure that what you're aiming for is lining up with what your workshop outcomes are. So this step is really all about baking the cake and making the cake tasty before even attempting to add the icing and the strawberries on the top. And with this whole analogy, the icing and the strawberries are the tech parts. So you might think that taking that time away from your computer to design may seem like that's taking up a lot of time. And look, I love the computer. I love my iPad. But even I suggest going traditional for this, for workshop design. So grab some different coloured markers, paper, Post-it notes, and just start jotting down one idea per Post-it note on activities, topics that you can explore. And when you get to that skeleton level, with those Post-it notes, it's really easy to see. It's really easy to see where the energy is going to go and where it can be detracted and where you need to up it. Really easy as well to edit when it's in Post-it note form. So rather than when you start designing in PowerPoint, you're like, I need to move that section up here, and you're scrolling down to slide 54 and moving it up to slide 3. When you have this all on a one page with all your Post-it notes, you just jot them around, and when you're happy with the sequence, you can check that out with a colleague or a friend or post it on the flip chart and go, hey, does this sequence actually work? And once the sequence works, then you start building your content up more. Actually, just on the topic of PowerPoint, in episode 52, I spoke to Thomas Kraft from Presentation Boss on this, and I really liked his message around slides. He said that the slides you have really shouldn't supplement what you're saying. They shouldn't repeat what you're saying. They need to amplify what your message is. So your workshop should be designed so if your tech fails, you don't fail. Tech should be there to amplify and increase the engagement. But you also want to make sure that if your tech isn't working, the workshop isn't a disaster, and you don't need to panic and put yourself under that kind of stress. Because I can guarantee at least once in your career, first-time facilitators, it will happen to you. The tech will work, you won't have a cable, the projector lamp will switch off. And it's actually really kind of nice being able to shrug it off when it happens and to say, that's okay, I don't need the slides. It's cool because you've designed something that just works. Rule number 11. Pretend that you have a facilitation USB in your head. I've got to admit, and it's funny because I was just talking about not having tech, and now I'm bringing in a tech analogy, but I have to admit this rule is a bit of a late includer, but I was up thinking about it earlier this week. So a key skill, and I'm going to start with emceeing, but a key skill when it comes to being a master of ceremony, and the great ones that I really notice are the ones that can relate what they've just heard from a speaker to what's currently happening in the room or as a response to something that's happening. So they seem to have this innate ability just to find linkages and to remember things and to recall them when they need to. And it is a skill, but it can definitely be taught. And again, I think it comes through a lot of doing it, getting the time to reflect on what you could have done better, but definitely that time on your feet. And I found through the interview process of doing these interviews with first-time facilitators, I hope I am getting a bit better at recalling a few of their key messages and bringing that into the next question and weaving it in. So my little hack for doing that is you don't need to remember everything. You just need to remember and store some key takeaways, some key phrases, and just store that in that little USB that's in your head. So you know what content you're going to cover in your workshop in the future, and your participants don't. And that's the kind of key that you have. So if you know that you'd be talking about conflict or a topic in that afternoon session and someone's mentioning it through the morning session. When it comes to talking about in the afternoon, you can say, hey, and Jim mentioned this part about conflict when he shared this story about his old boss. That's all you need to do. It's something that's simple. But what you're doing is you just, as the conversation is tracking through the day, you're noting it in your USB and you know when you can bring it back out. So when I interview my podcast guests, they might have a response that goes, for over 5 minutes. But what I might do is hook into a couple of really key phrases, things that I want to explore, but that also link into something that I'm keen to talk to about them next. So they'll be telling a story, then I might say, hey, when you said this point, that reminded me of this, and then we move on. It's kind of like the art of segueing, and it's being able to do that seamlessly. So I like the analogy of the USB. I don't know if it works for me, but it's like you just need to store that memory and you will know when you need to use it because you know what topics are coming up. So file it away when you hear it. Remember who said it, and you get bonus points if you can relate elements of what they said, what their direct quote was when you bring it back later that day. What that shows your participants is that you're really listening to them, but it also shows that you're drawing connections between different topics, and that helps everyone learn a lot better as well when they see those connections. And the final rule is rule number 12. Create space for the connection and for the conversation. So I think we can be pretty tough on ourselves as facilitators to have to do it all, to fill up the sessions with tons of information, activities, props, fireworks. And I think, it definitely is my Achilles heel, the fact that I feel like I need to just be the one that's doing everything. And you might also remember in previous episodes, I continue to share these stories about one particular 3-day workshop I attended in Singapore. I flew to Singapore to attend a workshop run by Sean D'Souza from Psychotactics. He's also been on the podcast. This podcast was all about landing pages. It was actually just called the Landing Pages Workshop. So nothing too exciting in terms of the topic. But what Sean and his wife Renuka created in that 3-day workshop was an incredible environment, and the connections made was something that I hadn't really experienced before. And we kind of joke about it now, but over those 3 days, we spent over 8 hours in the cafe just talking and connecting. In fact, on the morning of day one, Sean got up to the front of the room, and everyone's invested a bit of money into this course. But he openly acknowledged and said, look, I can teach you everything you need to know in 3 hours, but I'm going to guarantee you the skill. And the weird thing is, if you ask me what that psychotactics workshop was about, how do you write a landing page, I could actually easily go through it all today, and I can recall everything from that workshop. I definitely got a skill from it. But what Sean and Renuka did was they gave us the space to connect with each other through conversation, through that downtime. And that was almost as meaningful as the content itself. So that course was back in April of last year, and we still have a very strong WhatsApp group communicating with each other. And the good thing about a 3-day workshop is a long time, and I know I've been part of one and you walk out exhausted, but we didn't really feel that way. We didn't feel overwhelmed at all because we didn't have that constant fill of information and activity and the fireworks. It was a steady pace, but there was a lot of space for discussion. We got to leave the workshop environment. We got to walk around, get fresh air, eat great food, and drink great coffee. Oh, and the other cool thing they asked, this is just a side note, not really related to the rule, although it could be about building connections, was a lot of the participants were from around the world. And so they asked each of us to bring something to the workshop, some food that reminded us of home. And so every break we'd actually share a new dish and share a story of why we brought that, what it reminded us of. So I think there was another really neat trick to building that human connection. So with this rule, I think at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, what is the outcome? And it's usually some kind of learning objective, but I have no doubt in all of the workshops or conferences that you've been a part of, one of those really main outcomes is all about building or deepening the connections with the content. So connecting with the content, but also more so connecting with the people. So to do that, you need to design it in, or you need to think about what information can come out or activities can we use that can help foster that connection, and learn to be okay with maybe trying to give people some more space and longer breaks so they can actually develop those deeper connections. Okay, and that's it. That is it, guys, for part 3 of the 12 rules for facilitation. That is all the 12 rules. So here's a quick recap of what those last 4 rules are. Rule number 9, never start a workshop with logistics. Rule number 10, assume your technology will always fail. Rule number 11, pretend that you have a facilitation USB in your head. And rule number 12, create the space for the connection and for the conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. These are all very personal to me. I'm wondering if you've resonated with any ones in particular. Hey, you might even disagree with one of them. Let me know. Are you curious or have any other opinion? I'd love to hear from you. You can either send me an Instagram DM at Leanne Hughes. Connect up with me on LinkedIn. I love getting more connections and reading all of your articles on there. Or simply send me an email, hello@firsttimefacilitator.com. And if you like the show and want to build your skills as a facilitator, make it easy for yourself and hit that subscribe button in your podcast player of choice, or tell a fellow first-time facilitator all about the show. I'd really love your support. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you. We're doing an interview next Monday. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful week.